we'll just take a few minutes for an intermission. And during that time, we're going to play a couple slides, images, pictures of Jeff Byers. Many of you know that Jeff passed away a few weeks ago, and he was going to be part of our performance today, and we deeply miss him. He touched storytelling in so many different ways. I'll always think of how he participated, actually organized a lot of Epic Day, and when people couldn't come and tell their part of the epic, he would jump up there and do it because he had the whole thing committed to memory. It was just extraordinary. So we'll take just a few minutes to look at some pictures from Jeff's life, and then we'll begin the second part of our program. So thank you, Shags, my co-host, for putting those pictures together for us. We'll miss him dearly. So if you're just joining us, my name is Brandon Spars. My co-host is Stephen Chagrin. We are board members of the Storytelling Association of California. There's Shags, better known as Shags, right there, with a hat now.
Yes.
And we want to welcome you. What's that?
My storytelling hat.
It's Shag's storytelling hat.
Do you,
perfect.
Do we still need time for a bio break for people, or are we good to go?
I think we can probably just launch into it, I think.
Okay.
Sound good?
I'm ready.
Good, thank you. So I just want to say once again that the Storytelling Association of California is, among other things, the umbrella organization for local community swaps. And one of the things that they offer is Zoom support for events like we're having today. And so if you're a member of a community storytelling group and you would like to use this online service during this time of social distancing, you can get more information about that on the Storytelling Association of California website. And there you can find out some of the other benefits of becoming a member. So I encourage you to join SAC and we're going to start something really interesting now, which I've never participated in, but we're calling it paired storytelling for today, with possibly moving into the name The Frog and the Moth as a title for this event. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The creator of this is really Rick Roberts. And of course, he's one of the tellers. And so if there's time at the end for some discussion, he can talk about how this event may move forward. We have 4 pairs of stories. Each pair features a traditional story and a personal true story. Each pair of tellers has decided on a single theme that will serve as a link between the stories. And then after the stories, there'll hopefully be time for a brief discussion of how the stories work together, illuminated each other, contested each other, the different nuances of the theme, and of course, much, much more. We're lucky to have Rick Roberts here as one of the tellers, who, as I've said, will possibly be treating this as an inaugural event for something that continues into the future via Zoom and beyond. So I'm very pleased to introduce our first pair of tellers. I'm going to introduce them both together, and they will be telling back-to-back stories, one traditional and one personal, on the theme, The Trouble with Love. Our first teller is Sarah Armstrong, educator, author, storyteller, chair of the board of SAC. There are so many different titles and hats that Sarah wears. To me, she's one of the most gifted, supportive tellers I've ever met, and I'm very lucky to be able to call her a mentor. The second teller is Sharon Elwell. She is a ghost writer, that is. She's written several manuals for people teaching English language learners and a few historical fiction books for elementary school students. But these days, what she enjoys most is coaching people who are writing memoirs, all of which led her naturally into storytelling, which is her favorite pastime. So please join me in welcoming first Sarah and then Sharon.
Thank you, Brandon. It's really good to be here and so excited that so many people are joining us. Once there was an old couple who lived on the edge of town. Now that hadn't always been the case. They had lived in the town, in the community, and raised their 3 sons. Now this was a town of fisher people, and all the people, able-bodied folks, that's how they made their living. Well, over time, those 3 boys of this couple, fishermen all, had succumbed to the storms in the sea, and they had been taken by the ocean. So the old couple, in their grief, moved farther out of town until they were living in a small house on top of a cliff overlooking the sea. To make ends meet, the old man would go into the forest nearby and gather sticks and wood to sell in the market every day to get food. Well, one day, as he came around a bend in the path, he saw a stranger, a tall man in a long white robe and a long white beard, who said, "I'm here to help you." And this man held out to him a pouch that jingled a little bit, and he handed it to the old man, who put down his wood, opened it, and it was full of gold coins. Well, immediately the old man fainted, dead away on the path. And when he came to, the stranger was gone, but the pouch of gold was still there. So he picked it up and walked towards home, thinking of all the things that he and his wife could buy, food they could eat, things that would keep them comfortable for the rest of their lives. And he was ready to share it with her. But on the way, he started thinking, I don't know. She may have some ideas that aren't really going to be the best. So I better take some time in thinking about how to tell her and how we would plan to use this bounty. So before he went into the house, he buried that sack of coins underneath some manure that was next to the steps to the house. And he went in, and the couple went to bed. In the morning, the old man was waking to a dream. He smelled sausages and bread baking. He was amazed at this wonderful dream he was having, but when he opened his eyes, he realized it wasn't a dream. Those wonderful smells were coming from his very own house. Well, he got up and he went into the cooking area, and there was his wife, and he said, "How is it possible that we have meat and bread today?" And she said, "Well, you didn't bring any food home from the market last night, so I was able to sell that pile of manure that was by the stairs to the farmer down the road who's planting a new field." Well, what could he say? What could he do? He had his delicious breakfast and then went back in to retrieve that wood that he had dropped on the path the day before. He bent down and picked it up, and when he turned around, there was that stranger who kind of smiled and said, "Well, I still would like to help you." And he extended his hand with what looked like another small sack of gold coins. Well, the old man took the sack and looked inside, and indeed, there were gold coins. And again, he fainted dead away on the path. When he awoke this time, the stranger was gone, but the sack was still there. So he picked it up, vowing to go straight home, tell his wife what had happened, and see what they could plan to do with this bounty. But on the way, once again, those doubts started creeping in. Maybe she'll have some ideas that really wouldn't work. Not sure how she would think about spending this money. So let me spend some time and think about it. So as he went into the house, he buried the sack in the ashes in the fireplace and went into her, and then they went to bed. He woke again in the morning with that wonderful dream, and again, it wasn't a dream. He went into the cooking area, and there she was with sausages and bread. It was just delicious. He said, "How is this possible?" And she said, "Well, again, you didn't come home with any food, so I was able to sell the ashes in the fireplace to the farm woman down the way who's making soap today." So again, what could he say? What could he do? There was nothing that would make this better. So off he went into the woods, again to retrieve those sticks that he had left for the last 2 days. He bent down, he picked them up, he was ready to go to the market, he turned around, and believe it or not, there was that stranger who shook his head and said, "Well, it looks like that didn't work. Let's try this. Here is a bag of 24 frogs. I'm giving this to you. What you must do is take it to the market directly. Find the aisle where the fishmongers are selling their wares. Buy the largest fish that you can find with the 24 frogs that you trade in the bag. Go straight there, do exactly as I say, things will go well." Well, the man took the frogs, thanked the stranger, started out on the path, thought strange thoughts again for a while, but kept going, went down to the marketplace, found where the fishmongers were selling fish, and bought a huge, beautiful fish in trade for those frogs that he took with him. He came home. It was too late, really, to do anything with cleaning the fish or preparing it to eat. So he hung it up outside his house so that it would be ready in the morning for him to finish off. He went to bed, and he and his wife were lulled to sleep by a storm, which dissipated. And finally, they were awakened by what sounded like singing and voices. And so they got out of bed and they went to the door and they looked out, and indeed, there were a number of young men dancing and singing and shouting and in celebration in their front yard. And the old man said, "What's going on?" And one of the young men said, "Well, we were out on the sea fishing, and that storm came up so suddenly, we couldn't see anything. We couldn't see where the land was. We couldn't see where the rocks were to avoid. We felt that we were doomed. But then we saw your beacon. We saw your light, and it guided us to a safe harbor, and we're here to thank you." The old man said, "Our beacon, our light, what are you talking about?" The young man said, "Up there, that light, that you have shining. It saved our lives. And when they looked up, they saw that that fish, that huge fish, was shining. And that had been what led the young man home. So these young men, and after them, provided for this old couple food and companionship for the rest of their lives. This is a story called The Shining Fish by Italo Calvino. Thank you. Sharon, you're muted.
There she goes. You should be on.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes? All right. This is another kind of story about the trouble with love. In 1959, Sherry Garcia was the prettiest girl in our high school. And so, of course, we worried about her. Now, you might wonder why we would worry about someone just because she was pretty. So I'll tell you. We worried about her because it was obvious to everyone that Sherry Garcia was in love. You might wonder how we knew that Sherry Garcia was in love, so I'll tell you. It had to do with the Friday afternoon sock hops. Every Friday afternoon, the cafeteria tables were folded up and the floor was swept, and a stack of 45 records went on the turntable. And Chuck Berry and Fats Domino filled the room, and we all danced and had a lot of fun. But if the Platters or Johnny Mathis came on, the mood changed, and Sherry Garcia would put her head on her boyfriend's shoulder and close her eyes while they danced. And we knew that she was doomed. Now, how did we know that she was doomed? Well, that had to do with Mrs. Wendover. Mrs. Wendover was our sex education teacher. She didn't look like an expert on sex. She had Coke bottle glasses and a pretty serious mustache. But the state of California had certified that this woman could teach sex. So, of course, we hung on her every word and wanted to know all that she knew. She had hidden depths. Well, one day, Mrs. Wendover brought a beautiful white gardenia to school. And she handed it to the first girl in class and told her to smell it and feel the wonderful soft petals and pass that gorgeous flower around. And so we did that. And by the time it got to the last girl in the room, that gardenia was in pretty sad shape. It was brown and crumpled. And Mrs. Wendover told us, what happened to that flower can happen to girls. And so, of course, we worried about Sherry. And so, of course, in just a few months, what we expected came to pass. And the rumor went through school that Sherry Garcia was dropping out. She was pregnant. We watched her empty out her locker and leave. We thought about the barren apartment with the linoleum floor, the Formica tabletop, and the bucket full of dirty diapers. And we thought it would be tragic to be you, Sherry Garcia. Well, fast forward 20 years to our class reunion at the Elks Club, which should have been a joyous occasion of reuniting and being happy to see one another. And of course, it was that for the first half an hour or so. And then an atmosphere of gloom descended at the long table where we were sitting. Some people were drinking too much. Some people were weeping. And you wonder what would bring on something so tragic that it would change this happy celebration into something altogether different. So I'll tell you, the thing was, we all had teenagers. Some of us had children who were turning 13. Others of us had children who were turning 15. And our hearts were heavy. One father said, I don't know what happened to her. She was such a delightful child. And then she woke up one morning and said, I hate you. I hate everybody here. I hate this house. I don't know how I ended up in this stupid, stupid, stupid family. And he began to cry. In this heartbroken atmosphere, we barely noticed that the door opened and Sherry Garcia came in with her husband. Noticing her, of course, we were all curious to hear her story. She sat down at the table with us and said that the pregnancy that had worried us so resulted in twin boys. And those boys had both graduated from college this last June. When they were old enough to go back to school, Sherry had done the same thing. She had taken an engineering degree at UC Berkeley and was now working at a six-figure job in San Francisco. But just then, the Platters began to sing It's Twilight Time. And Sherry and her husband got up to dance. And just as before, she put her head on her shoulder and closed her eyes. And just as before, she was the prettiest girl in our class. But this time, as we looked at her, we thought, it must be wonderful to be you, Sherry Garcia. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. Those were great stories. You can hear me, right, everybody? Yes. Good. Wonderful. I enjoyed those both. So before we get to our second pair, I just want to say a few words. The Moth has really made personal stories quite popular. The true tale told in 5 minutes without notes has definitely become a genre in itself. And of course, here in the Bay Area, if you go to a Moth story slam, you're likely to be in a line that goes all the way around the Freight and Salvage Theater or the Castro Theater before the event begins. Largely, the audience members are in their 20s and 30s. And it was pointed out in the most recent edition of Storytelling magazine that these people in this audience seldom go to festivals or venues with traditional stories. And the article was really bemoaning the division that was taking place between the personal tale and the traditional story. And so that's part of what we're doing today, is linking personal and traditional stories through theme. And of course, there may be other ways to do that. But the person who came up with this format is one of the tellers. And he is, in fact, the next teller. His name is Rick. Actually, he's going to be going second, sorry. But Rick Roberts, when I first met him, he was a finalist for West Side Stories Grand Slam, and he's been a finalist numerous times, I know that. He started telling stories by writing his memoirs. So Sharon, you might have a client there. He's the creator of this event format, which we are informally today calling the Frog and the Moth, and he'll hopefully be available for discussion after the event. And then before Rick telling a traditional story will be Liz Nichols. Liz says that she got lost in the myth and folklore section of the library and never found her way out. She's enchanted audiences of all ages, from San Francisco's Asian Art Museum to the Sierra Storytelling Festival. She loves teaching. She's a master trainer in time slips creative storytelling for people with memory loss. And she's the former director of storytelling programs at Stagebridge. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Liz Nichols.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. What a great idea. I actually have two stories for you today. The first is a very short folk tale from India. It's about a woman who knew a story and she knew a song, but she never told the story and she never sang the song. And the story and the song, trapped inside this woman, got frustrated and angry and bursting to come out. So one afternoon, as she was dozing, the story just came right out of her mouth, and it turned itself into a pair of men's shoes and placed itself right in front of her door. And then the song came out too and turned itself into a man's coat and hung itself on a peg in the entryway. And when the woman's husband came home, he saw the strange shoes and strange coat. And he asked her, "Who do you have visiting? What man is here? I would never bring a man in and invite him in while you were not here. You know that." Well, he believed his eyes more than he believed his wife. And he was so furious, he decided to go and spend the night at the temple of Hanuman, the monkey god. And he stormed off. And his wife was left to puzzle and ponder and worry, unable to figure out what had happened. Finally, she blew out her lamp and fell asleep. Now, in this village, the humans didn't know this, but after all the lamps were blown out, the spirit of the flame of the lamps, each one, they would all come and gather at the temple of Hanuman, the monkey god, to gossip about their masters and mistresses and all the foolish things that humans do. And that night, the flames were waiting, and one flame was very late. "Where have you been? Where have you been?" "Well, my master and my mistress were arguing. It was terrible." "Oh, it was terrible. Tell us, tell us, tell us, tell us." Well, he thought that she had a male visitor. "Well, of course he was angry. Of course he was. Of course." No, but they didn't understand. It was the spirit of the story and the song. Now the flames were having fun, not knowing that the woman's husband wasn't sleeping, he was listening. And so in the morning, he woke up and he went home and he apologized to his wife. "I didn't understand. You have a story and you have a song. Will you please share them with me?" And the woman looked at her husband and she said, "What story? What song?" For you see, they were both gone. Now, folk tales like that, they don't have a lot of psychological depth to them. We don't know why that woman didn't tell her story and she didn't share her song. But I can't help but wonder, was it some taboo she was afraid to break? After all, folklore and mythology are full of taboos. Just think of Pandora and that box she wasn't supposed to open, and what happened when she did. But in this story, and the next story that I want to tell you, I feel like there's a taboo that is still with us, maybe one of the most universal in human experience. Sometimes it's put on us, sometimes we put it on ourselves, and it's the taboo against telling the truth that you know. So once there was a king, and this king had a very embarrassing secret. On either side of his head, where he should have had human ears, he had the ears of a donkey. Now he covered them up with a headdress so that no one could see them. Except once a year, someone had to see them. For once a year, the king got a haircut. He was lucky. He got a haircut once a year, and he would call for a barber, and the barber would come and shave him and cut his hair. And then the king would say, "Well, man, what do you notice about the royal head that is special?" And the barber would, I have to say, I notice you have donkey's ears. This barber has displeased me. Off with his head. And the next year he would send for another barber. And over time, all the barbers in the kingdom were terrified to get the call. Every year at that time, they all grew pale and sad. And one year, a certain barber got the call and he was not going to go. So he pretended to be sick and he sent his apprentice instead. Now his apprentice was a jolly lad who went to the king, and as he did with all the customers, he sang and joked, told riddles, all kinds of things to entertain. And he noticed, but when the king asked, "So what do you see that's special about the royal head?" he said, "Oh, your majesty, I noticed that your eyes are so deep with wisdom and your nose long and noble and straight." And the king loved this and presented the apprentice with a bag of gold. The apprentice brought the bag back to his master. It was heavy. But as heavy as that bag of gold was, the apprentice's heart grew heavier and heavier as the months went on. You see, the king hadn't told him not to tell. He just knew he'd better not. And his master noticed that something was wrong with his apprentice who used to be so jolly. "Please tell me, son, what is troubling you?" I can't. "Well, then tell the parish priest." "Oh, no, I can't. I can't tell anyone." "Well, then, son, there's only one thing for it. Go to the woods, find an empty place, dig a deep hole in the ground, and in that hole, whisper your secret 3 times. Cover it up, and your burden will be lifted." Well, that's just what the apprentice did. He went to the woods, he dug the deep hole, he leaned into it and said, "The king has donkey's ears. The king has donkey's ears. The king has donkey's ears." And he filled it in. And it was like he could breathe freely for the first time in as long as he could remember. And that might have been the end of the story, except that before the year was out, a little shepherd boy with his flock of sheep was wandering through those woods and came to that very spot. And in that time, an elder tree had grown up right above that filled in hole. And the shepherd boy knew that elder trees with their branches as straight as a wax candle and the soft hollow insides were the perfect thing to make a new flute. When he put this flute to his lips and played, instead of notes, he heard this. "Listen, listen, the king has donkey's ears. Listen, listen, the king has donkey's ears." Oh, he couldn't wait to tell someone. He told the first person he saw, who told the first person they saw, and more and more and more and more, until, without even Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, it had gone viral. And it reached the palace and the ears of the king. And the king sent for the apprentice. "How dare you tell my secret? I swear to you, your highness, I did not tell a living soul." Finally, the apprentice confessed how he had dug the hole and told the secret into the hole. "Take me there," said the king, and so they went. And when they got there, the king saw that the ground was dug up, and he thought, wasn't sure what to believe, but he also saw the elder tree. And he thought, my royal piper needs a new pipe, I've heard that. He had his servants cut a nice branch of the elder tree, bring it back to the palace, and have it fashioned into a flute. And he called for the court to assemble, and he ordered his favorite piper to come. And when the piper put this flute to his lips, you know what it played. "Listen, listen, the king has donkey's ears. Listen, listen, the king has donkey's ears." Well, there was nothing the king could do now. His secret was revealed. And so, because this king, although we have seen that he was vain, and he was selfish, and he was insecure, and he was cruel at times, at least for the standards of his time, he was capable of a little self-reflection, a little growth, and so he managed to rule fairly wisely and live pretty well and breathe in peace for the rest of his days. And so were all the barbers in the kingdom. And so soon, I hope, may all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That was great. Two great stories about taboos. So I'm going to follow that up with my personal story about taboo. Brandon, am I on? Yeah? Okay. I had normal friends. They had normal parents. They never hung out together naked. But as a kid, I was used to seeing my family naked. At my grandparents' house in rural New Hampshire, we would all swim in their pond naked and wash up in their pond at the end of hot summer days, but it was far back in the woods. Nobody could see us there, so I was all right with that. And when we went camping, if there was a secluded beach or a lake in the middle of the woods, our family would all go skinny there. But as I grew older, I wanted regular parents, parents that I didn't see naked. And I was making progress. I had those regular friends and their regular parents. But for my parents, normal just wasn't going to happen. Because one day, when I was 12 years old, my mother announced, "We're going to Sunny Rest Lodge. It's a nudist camp." I freaked out. And I'll tell you, at 12 years old, I was really good at freaking out. But when the day came, I was in the car when we headed north out of Philadelphia up into the Poconos. I don't remember what my older sister said or her reaction to this insanity, but I stayed silent and pouting for the whole hour-and-a-half ride. My parents were going to pay for this. When we arrived, we registered at the front gate, and then we drove up to the pool area, the hub of the nudist camp, and there was a dressing room that we went into, or undressing room. And just to show them how mad I was at them, I quickly disrobed, took off all my clothes, and I headed for the pool on my own, ditched my family. I dove into the pool. And when I came up, I looked around, and there were dozens of naked women. So I did what any polite boy in puberty would do. I said, hello? About an hour later, I got out of that pool. My skin was all puckered, but I had learned a valuable lesson. I had learned, let's see, how should I say this? I had learned how to control myself. I rejoined my family, had a picnic lunch, and I was congratulating myself on my new self-command. So over that summer and the next one, we spent a lot of time at Sunny Rest Lodge. I hung out with the other teenagers. I even had a girlfriend there. They had a really neat rec room. It had old pinball machines in it, and it had a one-lane bowling alley, the old-fashioned kind, where you have to reset all the pins yourself. And I learned all the rules. No clothes allowed on the volleyball court. No bathing suits in the swimming pool. But no touching or kissing your girlfriend or wife and husband if you had your clothes off. You had to have your clothes on to do that. It was a little bit, complicated, but you learn the rules. Carol was my girlfriend. Now, other than being naked together almost all the time, we had an innocent platonic relationship. I mean, we were 12 and next year 13 years old. Yeah, some of the older kids would sneak off into the woods and do whatever the older kids did, but we were too young for that. And Carol had an older sister named Joanne. Now, Joanne was the only person at the nudist camp who never took off her clothes. And she got a special dispensation on the rule for swimming, and she was allowed to swim with her bathing suit on. And there was something about a girl wearing a bathing suit, the only girl wearing a bathing suit, that drove us boys crazy. We would sneak around the dressing room when Joanne was getting dressed into her bathing suit and then dressed back into her clothes and try to get a glimpse of her, but none of us ever saw her naked. Back home in Philadelphia, I didn't tell any of my friends about the nudist stuff. Now, my parents, they wouldn't have cared whether I told my friends or not, but I kept it a secret. My friends at school and the kids on the block, they thought we went to just a normal family resort up in the mountains. And it was easy enough to just tell them about what things we did up there and not mention the fact that everybody was naked while we were doing all those things. And I felt really superior to my guy friends. Getting their hands on a Playboy magazine back in those days, that was big time. But I was so far ahead of them, like hundreds of naked women ahead of them. And still, part of me longed for normal parents and just a normal life. And during the next summer, my 14th year, I finally was old enough to getting little independence, and I went to camp, but I went to a baseball camp, not a nudist camp, up near Boston. When I returned to Philadelphia late that summer, my parents, after spending the summer at Sunny Rest Lodge, said that I should call Carol. It seems that Carol's parents and my parents thought that we should go on a date or something. I had never dated yet, but I had just spent a month with sweaty, smelly boys, so I gave Carol a call, and we decided to go bowling. As the evening of my date with Carol, my first date ever, approached, I got very, very nervous. Would I still like her? Wouldn't it be weird to be bowling with her with clothes on when I had already spent days on end with her naked? And wasn't this an ass-backward way of going about all this stuff? On the evening of our date, I took the bus from our house in Philadelphia to Carol's house in Philadelphia. I rang the doorbell. My hand was shaking. I hadn't seen Carol in a year and a half, and I was going on my first date. Carol's mom answered and, with a smile, invited me in. Carol's dad was there. Carol was there. And Joanne was there too. And they weren't naked. And Carol, her mom, and her dad, they all looked like strangers to me. I could hardly recognize them with their clothes on. Joanne, though, Joanne looked, well, Joanne looked just like she always did. Funny about that, huh? Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Revealing, huh?
Yes, revealing. Very good. I was wondering,
Say
was the bowling alley, I assume you had to wear bowling shoes when you
Now,
were,
now you could do it with bare feet, or you figured out how to do that after a while.
all right.
You
That
figured
was
out
great.
how to do a lot of things naked after a while.
So, yes, that was the theme taboo. I failed to mention that at the beginning. Our next pair of storytellers are going to be telling on the theme, It's You, Not Me. And we have a powerhouse duo here. Beginning the paired telling will be Kay DiMartini, and she's not only a storyteller, she's also an event organizer. She began in Oakland, where she was the co-host to an event, I believe it was called the Oakland Story Slam. And of course, she's moved up to the North Bay, where she's done many different events up here. She's been in the Moth, she's been in the Grand Slam of the Moth, and we're very lucky to have her today. And paired with Kay is Tim Araneta, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction. He's an award-winning storyteller based in Berkeley, and he's performed on stages in schools, theaters, and festivals across the country. He's trained as a playwright and actor. He brings more than 25 years of experience to his performances. He was originally interested in sketch comedy, and he found he could get as big a reaction from audiences from a Grimm's fairy tale as he could from original comedy, and he started down the path of collecting and retelling obscure folk tales. So on the theme, It's You, Not Me, we have Kay and then Tim.
All right, thank you. So I lived in Minnesota, and then I moved to the Oakland, Berkeley area. Loved it, loved the energy and the creative spirit and people everywhere, and I would walk and I enjoyed it. But my favorite class took place in Berkeley. It was a dance movement class, so I would have to drive there. So I would drive there in these streets, and I would get to Berkeley, and I had a hard time managing. It just seemed like it was hard to find parking, and then people would jump out in front of me trying to cross the street. And so I was trying to be aware of pedestrians and drive at the same time. And one time a woman came out in front of me. I didn't even see her, and she was pushing a baby carriage. And it just freaked me out. I mean, I thought, wow, I could have hit her. And another time, I needed to make a right turn into the on the street to go to my class, and it was a fast light. I mean, the light, it was an arrow, but it didn't last for very long, and the street was full of pedestrians right at that corner. And it was always a tug of war because pedestrians would want to cross the street, and I would wait for the don't walk sign and my turn signal to go. Well, one day this guy, he wanted to cross the street, and it was my turn. I'd been waiting. And so I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I did this kind of movement. I'm turning, and he did this kind of like, and I was like, how do I interpret that? I wasn't sure what that meant. And so then I did this ICU thing, and he did this. And I was like, okay, he's blowing me off. I get that. So finally he goes, now the lights changed and I got to wait again. So this kind of created a pattern, and I was having a tough time. So one night I'm talking to my sister on the phone from Minnesota, and she said, how's it going? You know, how do you like it out there? What's new? And I said, well, gosh, you know, I'm just having a hard time driving here. And she said, yeah, a lot of cars, probably a lot of traffic there, right?
And I said, no, it's not the cars. It's the people. It's the pedestrians. And she said, what do you mean? I says, they jump out from anywhere. You just don't know. You'll be just driving and someone crosses in front of you. Or I'll be like at an intersection and the sign will say no walk or don't walk and have a red stop sign. And they just walk. And then I'm trying to turn and I'm afraid I'm going to hit them. And she said, hold up. Are you telling me people are walking when it says don't walk? I said, yeah, I know. It's just what they do here. She said, no, now that's just not right. You know what's going to happen, Kay? Someone's going to get hurt. You can't let that happen. You got to do something. I said, yeah, you're probably right. So I got off the phone that night and I thought, I got to do something. I can't let anybody get hurt. And now that I know, I can't unknow. And I thought, I got to start a movement. It's not a new idea. It's happened before. I mean, I had just watched Forrest Gump. And not the part about the chocolates, but the part where he went jogging. And then like a few people would jog behind him. And then pretty soon, like everybody's jogging and it's a thing. And I was like, that's what I got to do. I got to teach people by my example how to be better pedestrians. And it will cause a movement and people will get it and it will save lives. And, in 5th grade, I was on the school safety patrol. So I was familiar with rules and following them. And I actually got an award for being the most conscientious safety patrol person. So anyway, back to the story. I'm thinking about all this and I'm thinking of Joan of Arc, how she led people. I could do that. I could lead a new revolution. And then the non-smoking. Whoever thought we could take cigarettes out of bars and restaurants, and that happened. So this is not out of the realm of possibility. I could just be a vehicle to make this happen. So I decided right then and right there, I would do 2 things. 1, I would only cross at crosswalks. I wouldn't cross anywhere else. And 2, no matter what, when I was walking, if I came to the sign and it said don't walk, I would wait. And so I started doing that. First of all, the first thing I realized is that there's not very many crosswalks where I lived. So I would park across the street from my apartment with groceries and have to go down the hill, cross at the crosswalk, and up the hill to get to my apartment, even though it was right across the street from my car. But I was committed. I had to lead by good example. The second thing was, I had to have to wait patiently at every don't walk sign. I started to realize how long those lights are. I would stand there a long time waiting for that to change to a walk sign. And people would be walking because no cars are coming and they'd be like, hey, there's no cars. And I'd be like, I know, but it says don't walk. So that was my teaching moment. But I realized also nobody was really following my lead. I would tell my friends that, it was really a safety thing, that they should wait here. And they'd be like, well, there's no cars coming. And I said, I know, but it's the rule. It might save a life someday. And they'd be like, yeah, well, we'll meet you. You just wait here, Kay, and we'll meet you down at the pizza place. So after about 3 weeks of doing this, I was becoming kind of disillusioned, a little disappointed. I thought, Joan of Arc didn't have a happy ending. I mean, she was burned at the stake. So maybe I should rethink this. And I was at a light and the sign said, don't walk. And I looked around. No one was there, no cars. So I stepped off the curb and I quietly went across the street. And nothing happened. It wasn't that big a deal. And I was like, maybe I need flexibility or whatever. But I also felt conflicted because I do think there are rules for a reason, and I was torn. So the next day I came again to the light and it said, don't walk. And I was like, I've got this. I did it before. No one's around. I took a step off the curb and I started walking across the street. I got to the middle of the intersection and I heard a voice behind me. Hey, lady! And I turned around and the woman said, the sign says don't walk. And I said, you're right. And I walked back to the curb. Now I got to tell you, I may not have created a revolution, but I have much more compassion for pedestrians when I'm driving because I understand how long those lights are and how few those crosswalks are. But also, I'm still committed to waiting on the curb until the light says walk. Thank you.
Hey, very nice.
Thank you, Kay. That was so much fun to hear. Hi, I'm Tim, and there I am, and there you are. And like Brandon said, told you about me, I'm interested in fairy tales that people either have forgotten or never learned or come from corners of the world that we might not be as familiar with. And so I'm going to give a shout out now to one of our upcoming storytellers, Dana Sherry. She has introduced me to so many folk tales from Central Asia, Eastern Europe, that I would never have heard otherwise. And that's where I learned this story. Far across the Black Sea on the eastern shores, out there where the Argonauts landed to go in search of the Golden Fleece, there you'll see the peaks of the Caucasus. And the people who live in those mountains and around those mountains, they have an oral tradition that goes back longer than the ancient Greeks, before the time of Homer. And they tell epic stories of the great warriors, the Narts. And to the tribe known as the Circassians, the greatest Nart of all was named Warzimeg. Now, Warzimeg was a cunning warrior. He was great with courage, great with strength, great in size and stature. In fact, they called him the Great Nart to his face. As in, oh, Great Nart, may fortune be with you in your battle. Oh, Great Nart, thank you for protecting us. In fact, even his wife, the Lady Centenaya, referred to him as the Great Nart. Now, let me tell you about his wife, the Lady Centenaya. She came from a far distant country. She was, in fact, a war bride. And when Warzimeg brought her home, she was a stranger. No one knew her. But in time, as she lived among them, they began to respect her and trust her. She was very skilled in healing, and she was very wise. And in fact, when Warzimeg would come home from battles with the spoils of war, delivering cattle to everyone in his village, there were those who said, Warzimeg, O great Nart, once again you have provided us with so much. Thank you, O great Nart. But there were others who said, thanks. We're certainly glad you married Lady Centenaya, for since she has arrived, this village has prospered. And in fact, Warzimeg heard some people say, you know, that great Nart, no greater than you or me. It is his wife, the Lady Centenaya, that brings fortune to all of us. Well, the first time Warzimeg heard this, didn't bother him. And the second time he came home from war with the spoils, it didn't bother him. But the third time, and the fourth, and then finally he had had it with people saying, oh, Warzimeg's valor, his courage, his good fortune, the cattle he brings us is only because of his wife. He had had it. He had distributed all the cattle to the people of his village. He entered his home and he sat down, and his wife brought him a large tray of food and said, the feast is ready, O great Nard. Warzimeg, he looked at the food, he looked at his wife, he looked at the food, and he found he had no appetite. Oh, great Nard, what is it that troubles you, my husband? I have come to a decision. I'm going to give you your freedom. You and I can no longer live in the same house. You must return to your country. Oh, great Nard, what offense have I brought? Why, have I angered you? The people are saying that the good fortune of the village is not my doing, but yours. I long for the days before you arrived, when people recognized my valor, my courage, and my strength. I want them to remember who it is that brings them their cattle. And the Lady Centenaya said, so be it. We shall be divorced. I will leave. Do not go away empty-handed, said the great Nard. Take something with you to remember our time together. Take something from the house that you treasure. I only ask this, O great Nard. Let me prepare a feast for your village, a 3-day feast. When I arrived here, I was a stranger. The people here have welcomed me, and I wish to pay my respects by holding a feast. Well, said the great Nard, you've been here for a few years. A few more days won't hurt. Yes, go ahead, throw that feast. And so the Lady Centenaya made all the preparations, gathering the drink, preparing all the food, and soon the 3-day feast began. All the people of the village, the people from the mountains and the fields, near and far, came to the big celebration to bid the lady farewell. And there was plenty of food, and the people ate and they drank, and they ate and they drank, and they ate and they drank, and they drank, and they drank. And I have to tell you, my friends, that a few of the people got drunk, but not the great Nard. And on the second day of the feast, the Lady Centenaya gathered some of the villagers around and said, why is it my husband, who has been drinking as much as all of you, why is it that he is not drunk? And one of the villagers came forward and said, and another villager said, my lady, your husband is great. Great. He is so great. He's larger than all of us. And so when he drinks as much as we do, he doesn't feel a thing. And the Lady Centenaya said, I insist that you get my husband drunk. Go and ask him to drink a toast to you. Have him drink to your health and make sure he drinks the entire horn. And so one by one, the villagers went up to the great Nard. Oh, great Nard, drink a toast to my health. He said, I've already drunk a toast to your health. No, no, drink right now, a toast to my health. And so the great Nard downed a drinking horn for one of the villagers, and then the next villager, and then the next, and the next, and the next. And my friends, I have to tell you, the great Nard did get drunk. And by this time, the party had been going on for 3 days. And so much had been drunk. It was about to run out. And the Lady Centenaya finally said, the feast is over. Thank you for coming. Go home. And as they staggered home, she stopped one of the youth and she said, bring the wagon around. And the wagon, in the back of it, she had put a mattress stuffed with hay. And she led Warzimeg, her husband, the great Nard, towards it and said, "My husband, lie down." And he collapsed and passed out in the back of that wagon. And she took the reins and she drove that wagon out of that village, out of that territory, across the border into her own homeland. And when Warzameg woke up, he noticed he was moving. He noticed he was in the back of a wagon. He noticed his wife was driving. He said, "What are we doing here?" And she said, "Oh, great Nar, did you not say that I am no longer welcome in your house? And so I'm returning to my homeland." Right? What am I doing here? "Oh, great Nar, did you not say that I should not leave empty-handed, but I should look around the house and take something with me that I treasure? I have no need of wealth. The only thing I valued there was you, my husband." The great Nart climbed up into the driver's seat next to his wife and said, "Turn this wagon around. You and I shall live together. For without you, I am nothing." And that is the story of the great Nart Warzameg and the lady Centenaya. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Kay. That was wonderful. So again, the theme there was, it's you, not me. Wonderful. The Great Nart. It's a great title. So for our final pair of tellers, one of them is me. And I think all you need to know about me is that I am a high school teacher. That pretty much occupies most of my life, but I am a proud board member of the Storytelling Association of California. My partner is Dana Sherry, and she was once a respectable historian of Russia until she learned the life of storytelling. She specializes in traditional tales from the heart of the Silk Road and is the artistic director of the Caravan of Stories, a monthly storytelling series dedicated to the folk tales of Central Asia and the Caucasus. She has toured Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and has performed at festivals, conferences, theaters, schools, libraries in Northern California, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and she has performed in the inaugural Frog and the Moth. And here she is, Dana Sherry, and we're not going to tell you our theme.
Yes.
We've decided to keep it secret, so maybe in the chat, you can start to take some guesses. It will give our audience something to do. Go ahead, Dana.
Okay, and actually part of the reason we're keeping it secret is it's been evolving, right? That as we've been working together, we've realized that, yeah, we have had different ideas about how to tie them together. And I also realized that this is a chance to tell a tale that it's been on my mind. You know how you have those stories sometimes where they're just kind of floating around, and you know there's something there that you're on the verge of understanding, but you're not quite there yet. And this is a great excuse to work on this one. And I should say that this is going far afield for me. It is not a tale from Central Asia or the Caucasus. It is actually the tale of the wife of Bath from Chaucer. So my version of it. And it begins with a knight of King Arthur's court. And this knight, he was tall, he was handsome, he was privileged, and he knew it perfectly well. And he was out riding one day. He was surveying the scene around him when his eyes fell on a lovely young woman. The knight felt himself stirred by the beauty of this maiden. And so he stopped his horse, he dismounted, and he walked over to her, and he took her by the arm. And despite her cries, he took his pleasure of her. And when it was done, he went back to his horse, and he continued on his way. thinking that this was the end of the story. But as you all can probably guess, it's just the beginning, because that young woman went to court and she told what had happened, and they believed her. And so Arthur summoned the knight to come to court and to stand and to receive judgment for what he had done. But just as Arthur was about to pass sentence, Queen Guinevere intervened. She said, "This man has committed a crime against women. And so I think that my ladies and I should be the ones to decide his punishment." And Arthur saw the wisdom in this, and so he agreed. And Guinevere turned to the knight, and she said, "I will give you a task, a question that you must answer. And if you bring back a true answer, I will spare your life. But if you cannot answer the truth, you cannot find the heart of the matter, your life is forfeit." And this is the question: what do women really want? The knight turned and he left. He had no desire to know what women really wanted. He had no idea how they would go about answering something like this, but he had no choice. And so he rode and he rode and he asked every woman he met what she really wanted. And as you might imagine, he got a lot of different answers. And he didn't have the insight, the knowledge, whatever it is that would have allowed him to see the thread that united all of these answers together. And so the days and the weeks and the months passed, and the year was drawing to an end, and he was no closer to the truth. The knight was making his way back to the court, and he found himself in a dense forest. And there was a clearing off to the side, and he saw in the clearing this woman, and she was the most hideous thing he had ever seen in his entire life. And he had seen a lot of women this year, but this one, he looked at her and she was old, and she was misshapen, and she was filthy, and she was very low class. And it wasn't just an aesthetic reaction. There was something visceral that he could not bear to even look at her. And so he spurred his horse to go by as fast as he could, but she called to him. And she said, "You should greet me. Why do you not stop and speak to me?" And he said, "I have no desire to talk to you." And she said, "But I know the answer you seek." And at that he stopped. He said, "What do you know about an answer that I seek?" She said, "I know what it is that women truly want. I will tell you if you will grant me one request." He really didn't have a choice, and so he agreed. She came over to the horse. He reached out and he lifted her up and he sat her in front of him, and leaning back as far as he could, he brought her to the court of King Arthur. And they dismounted, and as they went in, she reached in and took him by the arm and pulled him down and whispered in his ear. And this knight was not a paragon of wisdom, but he knew that this was the truth. So he came in. Guinevere called him before her and asked, "Have you found the answer to my question?" He said, "I have. What women want more than anything else is sovereignty, the right and the power to make their own choices." And Guinevere and her ladies looked at one another, and they knew this to be true. "How did you come by this answer?" Guinevere asked. And the old woman stepped forward and she said, "I have given him this answer in exchange for a boon. And what I want more than anything is to be your bride." oh, every fiber in his being screamed out against this. He could not bear to be in the presence of this woman, but he'd given his word. And at the end of the day, a knight has to keep his word. And so that evening, they scheduled and carried out the saddest, most somber wedding that has ever been. And that night, they were brought up to the bridal chamber, and the knight sat there, as sullen as an owl. And his bride sat in the bed and said, "My love, why do you not come to me?" And he just looked at her. And she said, "You must come. What have I done to deserve this treatment? I have given you the truth that has spared your life. So come and hold me in your arms." And he didn't want to go. She had spared his life. She had saved him. She had never been anything but kind. And so he stood, blew out the candle, and he took her in his arms. When morning came, the knight opened his eyes, and he looked with trepidation at the figure lying next to him in the bed, and to his astonishment, something had changed. And I don't know if it was something in him or something in her. But when he looked next to him, he saw the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She opened her eyes and she smiled at him. And she said, "My love, you have a choice to make. I can either have this form at night when I am with you, and have my old form by day before the world, so that none will know your love. Or I may take this form by day and return to my old form at night, so that none will see your shame." Night, he thought about this at night, all for myself, but then to have everyone think that I'm married to this horrible woman, but to have her beautiful by day, and then to have the old by around and around and around. And then finally he understood. And he said, "My wife, it is for you to choose." And she smiled. And now I do not know what the rest of the court saw when they looked at her, but I do know whenever the knight saw his wife, by day or by night, he saw her true beauty, and she knew it. And for that reason, they lived happily ever after.
Wow, Dana, that was so amazing. I noticed so many new things that I've heard you tell it as we practice, but it was wonderful. So, tough act to follow. It was National Merit Scholar Day at UC Berkeley, and they were pulling out all the stops to convince students that they had accepted to choose Berkeley and not somewhere else like Stanford. Now, to do this, they created a roster of classes, and they provided them with an opportunity to spend the night in the dormitories. Well, I was excited about one thing. On that roster of classes, there was the opportunity to see a lecture by Timothy White, the most renowned archaeologist of his day. And so I checked in and went straight for his lecture, but to my utter dismay, there was a handwritten note on the door canceling class. I didn't know what to do. So I went across the hall to another lecture that was starting. It wasn't on the roster, but I gathered it was a philosophy class. I went in, I noticed the UC students were all sitting at the back, so I sat amongst them. Before the class had started, a young, beautiful woman walked in. I knew she was a merit scholar. I had noticed her at the check-in. She had long, lovely legs and a very short black miniskirt. She wore high heels and tons of makeup, something that the girls at my high school in Marin County did not do. Unlike us, she walked right up to the front of the lecture hall and sat in the second or third row all by herself. The professor entered. He was an enormous man. His sweater clung to his body like it was damp, and a loop of loose wool hung below his waist, just like a lowercase letter J. In his arms, he held a load of newspapers, which he didn't set down, not even when he began to furiously pace back and forth in the lecture hall. He was talking excitedly about a philosopher named Hegel, and as he did so, he was opening every drawer, opening every door to every cabinet, feeling along empty shelves. He seemed to be searching for something. Finally, his foraging did produce something. It was a discarded half a sandwich covered in chalk dust, but he held it up in triumph and balanced it on 3 fingers like a wedge of delicious pie. Well, he led up to the climax of his lecture, and right when he made a poignant point, that was when he popped the sandwich in his mouth with a flourish. There was a dull groan through all the UC students. Oh, but the professor had forgotten to say something. The problem was now he had something in his mouth, and he huffed and chuffed and wheezed and sputtered just like a Labrador dog with a big ball in its mouth. And that was when somebody in the back asked a question. With an enormous effort, the professor heaved the sandwich out of his mouth, and it flew above us like a towering fly ball. The young woman in the front gripped the armrests of her chair. She was trying to trace the arc the sandwich was making through the air. She shifted her legs to the left, then to the right, but it was unavoidable. The sandwich came down with a splat right on her black leather miniskirt. She shrieked and began flicking at the wet mess in her lap. Oh, but the professor didn't miss a beat. He swung one leg over the first row, another over the second, and stood towering over her. She cowered as he raised his free hand up in the air, a giant dirty claw. And then he plunged his hand into her lap, scooped up the sandwich, and tossed it right back into his mouth. The woman was on her feet, opening and closing her hands, and then she bolted. Her high heels were pounding and skidding on the linoleum. She took the steps 1 at a time, 2 at a time, 3 at a time, and in the aisle right next to me, she lost a shoe. But she didn't hesitate for a moment. She continued right to the back of the room and exited the lecture hall with a bang of the doors. The attention shifted and settled on me. I found myself standing in the aisle, holding her shoe. The professor had finished his sandwich and was now smiling at me. Go on, he said sweetly. Go to her. Bring her shoe. And so I made my way to the exit. And just before I left, he called out, Prince Charming. And there was some scattered applause and some laughter. Well, back at the check-in station, I found the young woman. She was already filling out an evaluation form for her morning class. She was writing so furiously that her pencil was making knocking sounds on the table. She was writing in capital letters words like offensive and disgusting sandwich. I set the shoe right on the word homeless. She looked up at me gratefully. She tucked her shoe into a designer backpack. She had already switched into a pair of running shoes. We spent the afternoon together, and it was uneventful, except for the fact that she took every opportunity to tell me she was definitely not coming to UC Berkeley. She was going to choose Stanford. And the only reason she had come up from Los Angeles had been to see Professor Timothy White, and she hadn't even been able to do that. At the end of the day, we were walking down Telegraph Avenue toward the dormitories for our meal. She was telling me for the 200th time she was definitely going to Stanford. I mean, how does somebody learn from somebody like that? How does UC Berkeley employ somebody like that? That was when I gripped her arm and we stopped. Right in front of us was the trunk of a man. His torso was disappearing into a garbage can. It's him, I said. It's the professor. She dug her fingernails into my arm. She wanted to go back the way we had come. She wanted to cross the street, but in the end, we didn't have to do anything. A group of UC Berkeley students materialized around the trash can. One of them stepped forward. "Professor," he said. The man bolted upright. He still had an enormous load of newspapers under his arm, which, if anything, had only gotten bigger over the course of the day. "Yes," he barked, "can I help you?" The young man held out a styrofoam tray that presumably had food in it. There was a container of soup and utensils, all of which the professor began to juggle with his newspapers. He softened. "My students," he said, "my dear students, my lovely students." The woman and I were walking around him. While he was still engaged with the UC Berkeley students, he caught me with one eye and then kept it trained on me. And just before I was about to leave his field of vision, I swear, he gave me a wink. In front of the dormitory, we stopped. The young woman had been rattled by seeing the professor all over again. She fumbled in her bag for some cigarettes. I think more so than the professor, however, was seeing how much those UC Berkeley students cared for this man, how much they respected him, how much they valued him, whereas she had found him to be utterly loathsome. Eventually, she threw the cigarette on the ground in total frustration. Then, trembling, she faced me and buried her head in my chest and burst into tears. That fall found me at Stanford University. I don't know how much she was a part of the decision, but I do know that every class I scanned the faces of the Stanford students for hers. Every time I walked across White Plaza, I would look for her. Every football game. But I never saw her again. However, that fall, there were two articles in the San Francisco Chronicle. The first was an obituary for a UC Berkeley professor who had been found dead in People's Park, where he had often spent the night. The article listed his name. I'm just going to give it as S, Professor S. His memory deserves to be honored, and I'm not sure this story honors his memory enough. We all deserve to be honored. He had a home. However, he was on the extreme end of the spectrum for a condition known as graphomania. And of course, you recall the armload of newspapers he had. Well, he had collected so many newspapers, books, pamphlets, that he had made entry into his own home impossible. He lectured right up to the day that he died. Beloved among Cal students, it had become a tradition for the students of Philosophy 1, which he taught every semester, to come and find him and bring him a meal every day. He left behind a legacy of more than 12 books, seminal texts in philosophy. Well, the second article was more of a picture with a caption than an article. In the picture, holding up one side of his most recent archaeological discovery was none other than Professor Timothy White. And holding the other side, beaming broadly with total satisfaction, was the young woman from Los Angeles. She had gone to UC Berkeley after all. And there she was, living the dream as research assistant to none other than Professor Timothy White. Thank you.
Let's see if we can unmute everybody. This was wonderful. Let's everybody, if you can unmute yourself, that'd be great.
That was just wonderful. Great jobs, everybody. That's wonderful.
Brandon, that was tremendous.
So much. Thank you.
Terrific. Fun night.
Really enjoyed it. Lovely.
Yes. Wonderful.
Does anybody want to guess what the theme was?
Can you turn off the radio behind you, whoever it is?
Unrequited love. Something about true sight.
Yes. Yeah.
Something
How about beauty is in the eyes of the beholder?
Yeah.
That's very close.
Yeah.
First impressions can be wrong.
Yes.
It's only skin deep.
Appearances can be deceiving. Yes.
I think all of those are.
Can't judge a book by its cover.
Yep.
One of the things that I found interesting about both the stories is that they both seem to have a little bit about needing to lean into something, that sometimes we're afraid of the things that we need to hear or where we need to go. There's something that, I don't know, like there's this tension there. Like you need it, but you're kind of afraid of it at the same time.
Yeah.
Our shadow.
So, of course, we have a lot of people, a lot more than I have in any Zoom high school class. So there's no way to efficiently run a discussion. But I was hoping maybe if somebody had a question or comment, the best way might be to type it in the chat room, and then one of the performers or tellers could address the question. I think that might be the only way that this will work in any sort of organized way. So let's open it up. If you have a question or comment, please include it in the chat. And there's a toolbar that appears at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and click on chat in case you haven't been able to get into that, and address your question to everyone. It should be kind of the default for the chat function. And while we're waiting, Rick, do you want to say a few words about your vision?
Yeah, I came up with the idea, one selfish reason. I'm fairly new to storytelling, just 3 years, and I really don't know a lot of traditional stories, and I wanted to learn more, and one way to do that. Then when I heard that it's actually, maybe schism, but there's really two parallel paths of storytelling, the traditional and the personal, and they don't cross over very much. Well, this is a way to do it. This is a way to have them cross over. And
since you're delaying things so much, maybe you can stop.
So one of the ways that
yeah, please mute.
Is to have a theme shared by paired tellers. I suppose another way this could have been done would be to have all 8 tellers tell on one theme, and then maybe it would be a little bit less to keep track of. I don't know how people felt about having 4 different themes.
That's one way to do it. And I don't know how we're going to assess what you want going forward, because you can take this maybe to extremes. 2 tellers could really start crafting their stories more. Of course, the traditional storyteller isn't going to be able to change a traditional story too much. They wouldn't want to, and they shouldn't. But the personal storyteller can really craft their story to mesh a lot with that traditional story. Whether you need to do that or not, I don't know. It probably, brings that theme more to the audience. And this being our first foray here, it'd be great to hear from the audience and say what they liked and what they might like, and if they have any preferences going forward.
I'd like to propose an idea.
Okay.
Have the storytellers paired the way you did today, but not back to back. So the themes are scattered throughout the olio, and the audience has to guess, what was that one matched with?
Yeah.
And then at the end, the tellers will confess what they were doing.
Yeah, good idea. Have it as a contest.
Yeah.
Not a contest with a winner or a loser, but a guessing game. Yeah. Did you think number 2 was paired with number 6, or number 6 was paired with number 3? Let's have a discussion about that.
That's a cool idea. It involves the audience more too.
Involves them not only in the sense of participating, but making them think about the stories a little bit harder. They've got to keep that one story in their head through the whole time to see if it matches with something else coming.
Probably have a lot of people taking notes.
Yes, notes on themes. Ooh.
Well, and I think us storytellers might discover themes we didn't even realize were in common.
Mm-hmm.
That would be very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because everybody hears stories differently based on their own experience and values and so forth. I love that idea.
One of the things I really liked about it was working with my partner. I feel like preparing for an event so often I'm very alone, and it was just nice to be in touch with somebody leading up to the event. I really had a good time.
I got to tell you, you work the screen like nobody I've ever seen.
Yeah.
You work the camera. You were right there. You magnificent.
I have to keep 9th graders engaged for 2 hours at a time.
I understand, and you're masterful at it if you do it this way. I'm on my other computer. I must be highlighting whoever's speaking on that one. This
I had another idea. It's not doesn't have to do with this idea, but since I'll just throw this out there too, it would have to be after we can gather again in person. But I thought an idea of having like 8 storytellers on stage, and then the first storyteller gets to start a story and then stops at a certain point, and any other storyteller can then pick up that story, but it has to be their story and it has to be real.
An hour-long special, Coronavirus, a weekly report, NPR.
What is it, 20 questions or something where people whisper. By the end of the 8th storyteller tells the story, who knows?
So that would be a mix of personal and traditional, or that would really be personal story?
I think it would be personal, although who knows?
Yeah.
If you have you traditional are very in there, that would work too.
That'd be interesting.
But we got to get out of. I think it's better on stage than in a Zoom.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I suppose, let's see, I saw a question from Kieran. he wanted to know how you got the idea. I think you addressed it a little bit, Rick, but do you want to just quickly reprise that?
Yeah, it was mainly because I wanted to learn more traditional stories, but again, being new to storytelling, I was very surprised to hear that there were two different paths, and that actually, animosity is not the right word, but I don't know, some type of friction, or maybe it's just that there are two different paths, and these twains never meet. And when we're talking at SAC, we've got traditional storytellers and personal storytellers. Just seemed like a natural way to do it. And then when we started talking about it more and coming up with the idea of the frog and the moth being the personal storyteller and the frog being the traditional, then you can kind of really picture it happening, and picture those two types of stories coexisting with each other. In fact, I've thought of a lot of two. And if the traditional story was told that way in a pairing on a theme, it would be much more seamless.
It's just fun because you find, when you're a character, your imagination and your desires find new corners and new adventures in the story that you can fill in or improvise.
So we will see where this goes, and if it goes, there are lots of options. We could continue to do it on Zoom. There's a weekly storytelling session, the 6 feet apart ones, and they said they'd be interested in doing it if we want to give Shags a little rest. So we'll have to get together soon and talk about this. And I think we should get in touch with all of the people who attended today and try to get some more feedback from them afterwards as well, because we've tried it out. Now we need to get some opinions.
Kieran, I did your first person thing once, just like you were just describing.
Yeah.
And people came up to me afterwards asking me all kinds of questions about how I felt afterwards, and who I told and who I didn't tell. And I had to say, no, I was just telling a story. It got confusing. It was fun, but it was confusing.
You're allowed to say anything.
But they thought it was a personal story.
Anything.
I mean, if I was clever enough, I would have made up answers to their questions, but I wasn't that clever. I just had to say, no, I just told you a story. That didn't happen. And I wasn't trying to fool people. I was just trying to use that approach to a good approach to a good story. So you have to be careful.
Yeah, that could be embarrassing. You could tell a story of someone who is really not the persona that you want to portray, and people think that you're telling a personal story, and that is you. You walk out of there with a bad reputation.
And actors still do.
Believe me, I've walked out of lots of places with a bad reputation.
Yeah, that was deserved.
I'm used to it.
No worries, huh?
I actually used that approach on a story where the main character, if you told it in the third person, he kind of came off seeming.
Jenny, you cut out.
She's frozen.
Damn.
We'll get her back.
Yeah.
I just got bumped off on one computer. The other one stayed on. Mercury's not even retrograde yet.
Frozen.
Pretty soon.
Maybe Dana can put her comment in the chat until she unfreezes.
I have a question about resources. Where do some of you find some of these fantastic stories? What are some good resources that we might be able to look at?
maybe we could start with Dana and Tim and Sarah. And who else did a traditional story?
I did.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there's all kind of books, you know, fairy tales, folk tales, all kind of things. And the ones I tell are stories that have spoken to me. And I've often find stories in Cricket magazine, strangely enough. And National Storytelling Network sponsors a listserv where people can say, oh, I need to tell a story about this idea, this theme. Does anybody have ideas? And people all over the world make suggestions. And so there are many there. And then the different storytelling groups, you know, so there's lots around and lots to just search for in terms of what you're interested in.
Ed, it's like a lot of things. Once you read one folktale book, suddenly 1,000 will present themselves. But just start somewhere.
I just wanted to share that the first story I told is from Margaret Reed MacDonald, one of Margaret Reed MacDonald's books. I consider, you know, all her books Bibles, and she has 3-minute tales and 5-minute tales, and it's from one of those two. And so that's great to have something short that you can expand if you want. And the other story I told, I've known since I have a book published in 1960 called Danny Kaye's Around the World Folk Tales. And I've loved that story since I was a little girl. But in researching, I discovered that it really goes back to a myth about King Midas. And it's told all over Europe and beyond. And so I think going back, kind of like Dana said, a story that's been on your mind for a long time, whether it's a folk tale or it's The Wizard of Oz or, you know, whatever, something from childhood, and thinking about why that story meant so much to you when you were a kid and going from there.
I'll also say that when I tell stories to children and I ask them if they've heard of the Brothers Grimm and can they name some fairy tales, they can name 4 or 5. And if pressed, the smart ones can name 8 or 9. And then I say, well, my collection of the Brothers Grimm has 200 stories in it. And I still haven't read them all. And every once in a while, I'll just pick up and start reading at random. And a story that didn't speak to me when I first got this book 30 years ago will speak to me now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I'm going to, like we've been saying, maybe we can continue this conversation. We have a list of everyone present, and there's ways of having, you know, communication in the future and chats. I want to end by sharing my screen briefly. And I hope everyone sees my screen now.
Yes.
And one of the people who is in attendance with us is the regional gem, Linda Yamoto. And please mark your calendars for this. It's going to be July 18, 4 to 5:30. It's online. And opening for Linda is Tim Araneta. So you got to see Tim today. And it's going to be similar in that you probably will need to register in advance for it and get a link, just like we did today. I apologize, it was a little confusing because we had 2 events today, all on the same link. So it might have been better if we had 2 separate ones, I don't know. But I do want to, first of all, thank my co-host, Shags, who did a remarkable job. There was a lot going on, Shags, and you handled it very well. I really appreciate it. And then I want to thank all of the storytellers. And so that includes Sharon Elwell, Sarah Armstrong, Rick Roberts, Liz Nichols. Liz, you have to do jazz hands. I can see you. There. Kay DeMartini, Tim Araneta, and my partner Dana Sherry. And finally, I want to thank Pamela for just an hour of spellbinding ballads. I've never seen anything like that, and it really opened my mind to another genre, and I can't thank you enough. So thanks to everybody who attended, and I think we're going to end our meeting there, and I hope to see everybody at the Regional Gem honoring Linda Yamoto and of course Tim Araneta.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you. Thank you.
Brandon. Woohoo!
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.